The wind came off the high country and smelled like stone and dry sage. In the yard, a perfect ring of white ash circled the cabin and barn, neat as a chalk line 3 feet from the walls. An owl called once, then again, then stopped. On the bedside table, a silver watch ticked, then quit at 11:58. Caleb Mercer woke wet with sweat in the cool air. The dream had been guns and broken faces, the kind that follow you out of sleep and sit on your chest. He lay still until his breathing slowed. The quiet pressed in. Floorboards creaked like old bones. He dressed without lighting the lamp, denim stiff with dust, boots that knew the road. The Colt beside the bed slid into his holster with a sound he trusted. Outside, the moon threw a pale sheet over the yard. The ash ring showed at once a thin, bright halo around his life. He stepped to it and crouched. The ash was cool. No footprints crossed it. Down beyond the corral, Willow Run talked to itself in the dark. Water slipped over stone. He took the shovel from the cottonwood and walked to the far bank. The dirt there turned from powder to packed caliche. He put the blade in, weight down, lift. The smell of earth came up wet and metallic. A grave-sized rectangle took shape, not deep, just deep enough for names he did not say. He hit a rounded rock and pried it free. A river stone smooth and cold fit his palm like a thing meant for it. He closed his fingers until it warmed. A presence folded the night behind him, not the sound of a step, a pressure. He looked without turning, hand open on the shovel shaft, the other falling toward the gun. She stood at the edge of the cottonwood's shadow, long braid beads that caught moonlight like dew, a dress the color of the basin dust. Her hands were wrapped in thin cloth, dark where the skin beneath had blistered. Smoke lived in her hair. "You do not need to bury them," she said. Caleb felt something old stir in his chest. He kept his voice quiet. "Who are you?" "Talanez, Mescalero." Her eyes went to the hole, then to his cabin. "Their spirits have already traveled on." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh, might have been something else. "This is private land." "Is it?" She tipped her head toward the yard. "Look at your house." He turned. The ring of ash glowed pale as bone in the moonlight circling cabin barn corral. It stopped clean at that 3-foot mark, as if a hand had drawn a boundary and told fire to mind it. "That was not luck," Tala said. His hand closed on the Colt now. "You were here." "I was. Men came in the night with oil. They meant to starve your walls before they fed them fire." She lifted a bundle of charred wood and held it out. "They left this." He took it. The plank smelled of old smoke and sap. 3 glyphs had been cut into the face, deep and careful. A triangle, a wave line, a bent crescent like a new moon. "What do they mean?" "A warning and a promise. They mark the places they choose and the order they move in." Her voice did not lift or drop. "They will return." He studied the cuts. Someone had taken time to carve them, then had set the wood somewhere it would burn and not burn away. He turned it. The back was blackened and smooth. "Why save me?" he said. "You do not know me." Her mouth did not smile. "That is not the whole truth." Then she looked past him to the basin where the water ran. "This land sits on a line that matters. The fire wanted it. I told it no. You told it." He felt the ash between his fingers, fine as flour. "You shape fire with wind and space, with what you give it and what you do not." Her bandages tightened when she closed her hands. "It listens if you listen first." He wanted to say there is no such thing, but the ring at his back was white and round and impossible to argue with. He looked again at the glyphs. The triangle's point cut toward a corner. The wave ran toward a margin. The crescent cradled nothing. "What is your name?" she said. "The one you use." "Caleb Mercer." Her eyes held his for a breath. "All right, Caleb Mercer." Then she turned, not toward the road to town, but toward the black line of the Sierra de los Vientos. The dark took her in the way it takes a deer. He felt he should call her back. The word stuck. He did not sleep. He walked the line of ash until the sky bled from black to cobalt to a thin gray. He checked the corral. The animals were calm, too calm. The chickens scratched in the dust where the ring broke around their coop as if nothing had pressed this place during the night. At first light, he pried up the loose board under his bed. The wood box was still there. He set it on his knees and lifted the lid. Discharge papers from the war. A tarnished lieutenant's bar. A tintype of Eliza with her hair pulled back and her mouth set in the way that said she expected more from this world. The watch caught the light when he moved. He clicked it open. The hands stood fixed at 11:58. He closed it and put everything back except the watch. Hoofbeats came up the track mid-morning, not hurried. Judge Horace Whitlow reined in a bay at the edge of the yard. Old law in the set of his shoulders, ranch dust on his coat. "Morning, Mercer," Whitlow said. Saw smoke last night from my place. Thought I would ride over before heat set in and find you without a roof. Caleb wiped his palms on his pants. Someone tried. Whitlow swung down and walked the line of ash with his hat in his hand. He knelt. His fingertips brushed the white. He stood and looked at the gap to the walls. That is not how fire behaves on its own. No, report it to Pike, Whitlow said. Then he glanced toward town and made a face. Sheriff Doyle Pike will file it in a drawer or talk it to death depending who is listening. I will handle it here, Caleb said. The judge studied him. People are asking who you are, where you came from. They saw an Apache woman near the ridge last week. He let the words settle. Folks start remembering old fights when they see braids and beadwork close to their fences. She was not trespassing, so she was here, not a question. Whitlow let out a breath. I have seen marks like those you have in your hand. He nodded to the charred plank tucked under Caleb's arm. Abernathy Place 3 years back. Same kind of carving. They never got out. How many? Caleb said. Whole family. 5. Whitlow's eyes moved over the cabin, the barn, the well. He stepped into the ash ring and out again as if testing an invisible wall. I never saw a line like that. Caleb said nothing. Whitlow put his hat back on. If this was an accident, I am a bishop. Watch yourself, Mercer. Watch your knights. Then he took the reins and swung up and rode away without looking back. The day went hard and simple. Caleb fixed a split board on the corral. He took water to the trough and listened to the way it hit the wooden staves. He found himself looking to the ridge more than once to the place where the basin opened like a bowl. At sundown, he sat on the steps with the watch open in his palm. 11:58 watched him. The wind went soft and brought the smell of creosote and a thread of something sour. Oil. He stood. Far-off hoofbeats gathered beat on beat, not yet close, not yet here. He snuffed the lamp with his fingers and let his eyes learn the dark. The yard took on shapes. The ash ring turned to a faint halo under the stars. 3 soft knuckles tapped the cabin wall by the door. Tap, tap, tap. Caleb put his hand on the colt and moved without sound. He eased the latch and opened to a slice of night. The knock had come from the shadow of the porch post. Tala stood there, a darker shape against the dark hair, damp with dew-cloth wraps on her hands, gone the color of old smoke. They are on the north ridge, she said. 4. Oil on their saddlebags. The wind is wrong for you. He smelled it now, a sour thread riding the sage. His fingers found the colt, then let it hang low at his thigh. What do you need? He said. She held out a small leather pouch tied with sinew. Minerals. Throw it into flame when I tell you. Keep low. Breathe through your shirt. He weighed it in his palm. Fine grit shifted inside soft as flour. They moved without talk. She walked the ash line and set 3 little stacks of dry grass beyond it, each the size of a hat, each at a point where the ring curved tight. She took handfuls of loose sand and made thin paths between stacks and bare dirt. When she worked, she did not look at her hands. The bandages tightened when she closed her fists. Hoofbeats climbed out of the dark and got their shape. The first horse snorted and threw its head. A man laughed low. Caleb could make faces now. Edmund Carr in a decent coat. Roy beside him with a scar under one eye and a look like he chewed gristle for sport. 2 hired men, long coats that hid rifles. Edmund reined in at the edge of the yard. Evening, Mercer. We got word a wild spark was running around your place last night. Looks like she left you a pretty halo. Roy leaned in the saddle and lifted a torch. It painted his face orange and mean. I always did like a bonfire. He nodded at Tala, and I always did like a thief. Tala said nothing. The river put a quiet over the yard, a thin wash of sound that filled the spaces between words. Edmund smiled without teeth. Men like me offer to buy. Men like you say no. There is a cost to that kind of pride. Caleb stepped forward 2 paces. His voice stayed level. Leave my land. We will, after the show. Edmund tipped his torch toward the ground. The hired men began to unstopper bottles and flick oil in arcs that caught moonlight and fell black. Now Tala whispered. Roy flung his torch. It sailed a hot star with a tail and bit into dry grass. Flame took. It ran the lines they had poured until it reached the bare paths and paused. Caleb threw the leather pouch into the heart of the new fire. It landed with a muffled pop. Thick white smoke poured out low and heavy like a fog that had caught fire and changed its mind. It crawled along the dirt, curled over boots, climbed shins. Horses snorted and danced, eyes rolling. Breathe through your shirt, Tala said, already moving. Shots cracked. One splintered the porch post. Another slapped the cabin wall and left a white kiss of lead. Caleb fired once to spoil a charge and saw a rider pitch back as a hat flew. He went left into the smoke and felt heat grab at his face. The world shrank to 3 feet, and the sound of men who had lost their map. Roy burst out of the banked smoke with a piece of burning plank in both hands. He swung for Caleb's head. Caleb brought the Colt up, and the plank hit the barrel, sparks pinwheeling. The gun spun out into the grass and vanished. Roy grinned and swung again. Caleb stepped in tight and drove a shoulder into Roy's ribs. They fell together and rolled in dirt and cinders. Roy's breath smelled like whiskey and rage. His hands found Caleb's throat. The world tunneled and filled with a hiss. Then it cleared with a hard crack. Tala stood over them with a river stone in her hand, breath-ragged eyes bright. Roy sagged to one side, fingers still twitching. She tossed the stone and offered her wrapped palm to Caleb. Up. He took it. His chest burned where Roy's knuckles had dug. He could taste ash and iron. White smoke raked across the yard and made men cough and swear. Edmund's voice tried to climb over it and never quite did. "This way," Tala said. They took the least likely path straight through a slip of cottonwoods where the ash ring had thinned around a chicken coop. The birds had buried themselves in dust and were still. They cut for the creek. Grass brushed their knees. Caleb reached once for the pistol and remembered it was gone in the smoke. At the bank, she dropped to a crouch and put fingers to the damp mud. She looked back at the cabin, at the ring, at the thin columns of white that still curled and melted. Her face showed nothing and everything in the shape of her mouth. "They will come again," she said. "They do not like to be laughed at." He wanted to ask what she called this if not a laugh. He swallowed it. "You told it no," he said instead, and he was not sure if he meant fire or fate. "You can bend a river with a good rock wall and patient hands," she said. "Fire is quicker, but it listens to shape the same way." Her eyes had that far look people get when they talk about something they learned the hard way. They climbed up the slope to a ledge that looked over Willow Run and the long open of Coyote Basin. The land lay silver and black under the moon. On the far side, the Sierra held its line like a dark wave about to break. 2 summers ago, she said, white men came with glass bottles and little hammers. They took water at 3 bends and soil from 6 places. They gave the stream a number. She rubbed the edge of a bead at her throat with her thumb. "My grandfather said the basin is old medicine. They want a different kind." Caleb watched the river take a turn and throw light like it was rolling pieces of the moon. He felt the weight of the watch in his pocket. He thought of a night years back fence mending on Judge Whitlow's east line, a thin figure in the rocks who never stepped into light. He had left food 3 nights running and a scrap of paper with a name. He had not expected it to matter. Tala looked at him as if she had heard the shape of his thought. "There were 3 nights when I did not starve," she said. "Someone wrote C. Mercer on a torn envelope and left coffee with the meat. Mercy is a hard thing to forget." A light moved in the yard far below. Edmund had found his feet again. The smoke thinned. Men paced the ring and pointed. One of the hired hands took a torch and tested the white line. Flame licked and turned away. It made something like respect pull at Caleb's mouth. "They will find a way around it," Tala said. "They will move you where there is no ring to draw." He pushed air out of his chest that had sat there since the knock at the wall. "I am not moving." Her mouth made the shape of almost a smile. "Good." They stayed in the rocks until the wind shifted to the south and the smell of oil blew thin. The stars sharpened and then began to fade. They picked a path back to the yard, moving careful where the white ash had drifted and gathered. Caleb smelled it before he saw it. Not oil, not sage. Wood in full flame, the deep hot of a house taking. He broke into a run. Tala came even with him, boots quiet, breath steady. From the south fence, they saw orange break out of the cabin roof. The barn doors stood open, black mouths. The corral gate lay flat. Shadows moved where stalls had been. Edmund and the others were gone. The fire had its hands in the rafters now, and it pulled. Caleb went 3 steps toward the door before the heat shoved him back. He could feel the hairs on his arm twist. A plank fell from the roof and threw sparks like coins. He thought of the box under the bed and already knew. He circled for a window and found a spot where the frame had sagged and left a gap. He pulled his hat down over his face and went into his shoulder. Smoke filled his mouth and made the world choke. He reached and hit a table he did not need. He reached again and found the loose board and tore at it until the nails cried. It lifted. Heat came up from the empty space. The box was not there. He drew his hand back and felt blisters start where skin met wood. He came out with a cough that bent him double. Tala put a wet cloth from the creek across his neck and did not say a word. The roof folded on itself. A sound came from the fire that had no name, a hollow intake that ended in a roar. The cabin went to light. The barn began to catch in long tongues that lapped and held. They stood in the ashes of a life that had been simple. Caleb felt raw and still a log with bark stripped. The watch in his pocket felt heavy and wrong. He took it out. The face caught firelight and gave it back. The hand still read 11:58. He walked to what had been the kitchen hearth and stood until the heat forced him to angle his body. In a pocket where mortar had cracked, he saw a thin, bright thing. He crouched and moved the ash with a stick. A small brass plate lay there, edges black face clean where heat had polished it. On the smooth side, someone had scratched 3 numbers and a slash. A date. He did not know whose hand had cut it or why it had survived the burn. He wiped it on his sleeve and put it in his shirt. The corral was empty, except for hoof cuts that went toward the arroyo. He bent and touched the print of a mare he knew. The skin at his wrist was tender now. He straightened, mouth dry. From the lane came a single clop, not a horse. A man on foot with spurs. Caleb turned. Judge Whitlow stood at the gap in the fence hat in his hands. His face read the scene the way a surveyor reads a line. "I was too late," the judge said. Caleb looked back at the ruin and the red air above it. The heat pushed at him like a hand. He could not tell if he was cold or burning. "They took your stock," Whitlow said. He squinted at the ground. "They left a message." Caleb touched the brass in his pocket and felt the numbers like a brand through the cloth. He nodded once. Whitlow's gaze went to Tala. He took her in with the full weight of old learning, then with something more human. "Ma'am," he said, "thank you for the ring." She gave the smallest tilt that could be called a nod. The judge looked back at Caleb. "Decide what you can live with," he said. He did not look away from the fire when he spoke. Then he stepped back from the heat and left them to it. The roof fell at last. Sparks climbed and faded. The ash ring shone pale at the margin of orange. Tala stood beside him. Her shoulder brushed his sleeve. He was aware of the river stone at her throat, the way it took a shard of light and held it without blinking. They watched until the flames ate, and then were only eating themselves. The yard smelled like wet iron and pitch and a sweetness you can never mistake once you have known it. Caleb closed the watch and put it away. He looked at the place where the door had been. The outline was still there, a darker black against black. He took one slow breath that reached lower than smoke, and for the first time since the knock at the wall, he felt the ground hold under his feet. By the time the embers fell in on themselves, the sky had gone a pale iron. Caleb filled a bucket at the creek and poured it over his hands until the sting eased. Tala tied fresh cloth around her palms, then touched the stone at her throat and looked toward town. They walked the road when the sun had lost its teeth. Larkspur Crossing glowed at the edges. Lanterns swung on porches. Heat leaked from the saloon doors along with a half-song and someone's dry laugh. A dog barked twice and quit. The street smelled like whiskey and horse and fried lard. Caleb pulled his hat low. Soot had turned his shirt the color of old smoke. He kept a shadow where false fronts made deep seams along the boardwalk. Tala moved as if the dark had given her a map. He cut down the alley beside the church. A bell rope hung in a square of gloom. He set both hands and pulled until the rope jumped in his palms and the bell above went wild. Sound poured out of the steeple and ran down the street in waves. Heads turned. Men in the saloon stumbled into the night hands already reaching for buckets. A woman yelled fire and pointed at nothing. In a breath, the whole town faced the opposite direction. Tala slid past him and toward the white clapboard of Car Mercantile. She found the downspout and went up hand-over-hand toes on nail-heads small and sure. In the side yard, a freight wagon sat hitched but sleeping. Caleb crossed the street without a creak and went for the service door. The lock had a clean face and a soft click. Inside smelled like flour and coffee and new cloth. Shelves tall as a man stood in rows that made lanes of shadows. He moved through to the back stairs and climbed with the weight on the balls of his feet. The second floor had a short hall and 3 doors. From one came a steady tacking like rain on tin, telegraph. He set his ear to the wood. A voice low and flat stopped and started in the pauses between clicks. "You tell Kincaid the deeds go on the morning coach. His words are good enough for a judge." That last with a curl of humor. Edmund Carr. Another voice, a woman's crisp as a new banknote. "Do not say his name with the windows open, Edmund." The floor creaked as someone crossed the room. "Florence." The curtains were closed but left a thin leak of light. He set his hand on the knob, then tapped lightly with one finger. 3 quick, 2 slow. From the far window came the answer, barely a breath against the glass. 3 and 2. Caleb opened and stepped in with the Colt held low and steady. Edmund sat at a desk under a green shade coat off hair combed hard back. The telegraph key sat to his right, a thin wire running down the wall like a vein. Papers lay in neat stacks that made little white roads across the wood. Florence stood with one hand on the back of his chair rings, catching lamplight eyes bright without warmth. "Good evening, Mr. Mercer," Edmund said. Church seems excitable tonight. Keep your hands on the desk, Caleb said. His voice stayed even. Florence's gaze went to the bottom right drawer. Caleb saw it and moved his barrel half an inch. Do not, he said. The curtain breathed. Tala eased in through the opened window and put her back to a bookcase. Her glance slid to the desk, then to the rug. She found the line where the boards ran wrong and pressed a thumb to a nail head that did not quite match. The corner of a rug flipped. A square of floor with iron set into it showed paint rubbed smooth by feet that had never been seen. Edmund's mouth tilted. He glanced at his wife. You did all this for what? A ledger, a deed. You will find ink and imagination. We will find names, Caleb said. Florence called over her shoulder without raising her voice. Roy. The door behind Caleb blew inward. The edge caught him high in the back. Pain made light swim. His gun skated across the floor and under a chair. Roy Carr came through laughing and brought the butt of a pistol down toward Caleb's head. Caleb rolled and the blow cracked wood instead of skull. He came up into Roy's ribs and both of them went staggering. A window broke like a clap of winter. Glass went everywhere in a bright rain. A man came through with a shotgun in his hands and a scar from temple to jaw. He landed feather light for a body that size. His eyes found Roy. Jesse Hart older and tougher at the corners than in memory. He hit Roy square and the shotgun went off wrong and tore a bite out of the ceiling. Plaster dust snowed the room. Florence had made the drawer with the derringer. Tala took it out of her fingers and put it in her own pocket without looking at her. The women's hands touched for an instant. Florence let go first. Edmund rose behind the desk. He had a pistol that had been hidden in papers. He lifted it at Caleb, face set calm as a clerk. A shot cracked from the doorway and threw him back into the chair. He looked surprised as the stain bloomed through his vest. His mouth worked once and stopped. Judge Whitlow stood in the door with a rifle that still breathed smoke. His hat brim had dust along the edge like frost. I told myself to stay home, the judge said. Then I told myself I was a liar. Jesse had Roy down to one knee and kept him there with a forearm across the throat. Roy clawed for air and for a knife that was not in his boot. Jesse hit him once clean. Roy sagged. Boots pounded up the back stairs, voices stacked on voices, Sheriff Pike rough and loud and men he had found to be brave next to a badge. From the street, the church bell still tried to tell a story no one heard. Tala knelt at the floor plate and put both palms on cold iron. She let her breath find a slow count and turned the dial by touch. The burner light made a faint sheen on the sweat at her temple. Caleb held the door with the judge while Jesse stripped Roy of anything sharp and became a wall. Numbers talk if you ask them right, Tala said almost to herself. 7, 2, 8, 1. She stopped. The brass plate in Caleb's shirt had a date cut deep into it. He took it out and held it where she could see. 8/17, 1827, he said. She nodded once, turned the wheel, and felt the catch give. The safe door swung open and breathed a smell like old glue and ink. Inside were deeds tied with red string ledgers thick with neat hand envelopes with seals from the Federal Land Office bank drafts to a sheriff whose name sat clear as daylight. Caleb reached for the letters on top. His fingers shook and he made them still. The first page was a polite note from Captain Byron Kincaid to Mr. Edmund Carr. It expressed satisfaction with the pace of acquisitions along Willow Run and named Coyote Basin as a priority. It listed families who had burned. It signed with a practiced flourish. Sheriff Pike barked from the hall. Open in the name of the county. His palm hit the wood. Whitlow lifted the latch a fraction and spoke through the slit. You will speak when spoken to sheriff, he said. This is a crime scene, and your name is on some of the paper. The judge had not raised his voice. It filled the room all the same. Silence on the other side, then a curse swallowed fast. The men with Pike shifted their boots. The door did not move. Tala handed Caleb a ledger. Columns of numbers marched like soldiers. In the margin, someone had written a list of targets with small X marks next to 5 names and empty boxes after 3 more. The bottom had a thin, stringy hand with an Eastern look. It read Kincaid and then a name he did not know. Florence watched them all as if she were not in the room at all, but behind glass, somewhere clean. Her cheeks had color again. She set 2 fingers on Edmund's sleeve and let them rest there without pressure. Jesse took the derringer from Tala and found a hollow in the bookcase where the wood did not sound right. He pried. Behind was a pocket of telegram blanks with carbons attached. He laid them on the desk in a small straight stack. He kept one for himself and folded it into his shirt. Caleb felt the floor under his boots. He heard the bell ease itself toward quiet. In the gap, he could hear the wire on the telegraph still humming. The key lay where Edmund had left it. A single dot tapped itself into the room and died. Pike hit the door again and got the same answer. This time, the answer was Jesse moving to stand where he could see the hall, his jaw set and held. Roy groaned and drew one knee up and got the toe of Whitlow's boot for it. Caleb put the letters inside his coat. He tucked the ledger into a flour sack that had been meant for goods and now held crimes. Tala tied it with quick fingers and pulled the knot hard. Her hands had gone a little pale under the cloth, and she flexed them once. A hat brushed the jam outside. A calm voice spoke. Federal authority claims this location for inspection and seizure. Byron Kincaid had almost no New Mexico in his vowels. He wore Washington like a second suit. Whitlow looked at Caleb and did not blink. Caleb's eyes went to the window Jesse had broken. The night beyond had turned from ink to smoke. The church bell made one last tired swing and let go. The knob on the main door turned slow. The wood under Caleb's palm felt warm where the shot had skinned it. Tala slipped the river stone from her neck and pressed it into his hand. Her fingers were cold and quick. He closed around the stone and felt the smooth weight take his skin. Outside, Kincaid said the sheriff's name like a lever, and the sheriff found his courage again. Boots set. Metal clicked. Breath gathered. The hall drew tight as a throat. The safe door stood open behind them. Papers lay where light could find them. Edmund's chair sat crooked. Glass glittered underfoot like frost. The room held its breath. Kincaid's voice pressed at the door. Whitlow's hand stayed on the latch. Caleb met his eye and gave the smallest tilt. 3 knuckles touched wood behind his hip. Tap, tap, tap. Tala moved first. She slid the sack of papers to Jesse. He looped it over his shoulder and crossed to the broken window. The alley below held a freight wagon left in shadow beside flour barrels and a stack of crates. He dropped, hit the wagon bed with a grunt, and vanished into the dark. Florence's gaze tracked everything without blinking. Roy groaned and tried to push up. Whitlow put his boot on Roy's wrist and set weight until Bone spoke. Kincaid said the judge's name as if calling roll. Horace Whitlow, you are interfering with federal seizure. Open or be opened. Whitlow breathed once through his nose. Sheriff Pike, he said, I suggest you consider the company you keep. The next judge to read these pages will make a long day for you. The hall went tight and then went loose. Pike swore under his breath. Metal eased. Caleb lifted the latch and shoved the door hard. It caught Pike in the shoulder and bought a blink of silence. Whitlow stepped through the gap and filled it with his shoulders. He held the rifle at his hip. Kincaid's coat sleeve showed neat wool brass on the cuff. The federal badge on his belt winked once in the lamp glow. Caleb grabbed Roy by the collar and dragged him to the bookcase. He looped cord around the man's wrists and pulled it until Roy's hands went pink. Tala was already at the window. She swung out like a cat, hung a beat, and dropped. Caleb went last. He gathered the brass plate with the cut date, slid it into his shirt, and hooked the sill with his palm. Glass sang under his boot. He breathed ash and night and fell to the wagon. The boards caught him. His shoulder told him he was still a man. Jesse hissed for quiet and handed him the sack. Tala took the reins from where they had been thrown over a crate. She clucked once. The team leaned and moved. The wagon rolled into the alley like it knew how to be a ghost. Behind them, Pike finally found his voice. By county authority, stop. Boots hammered wood. Someone hit the window frame with a pistol and swore. Whitlow said one word that Caleb did not catch, and the hall went quiet again. They cut behind the livery and along the back of the church. The bell rope hung still. The tower gave one last, tired creak. The street had turned into a row of doorways, peering out. The wagon reached the edge of town. Caleb slid off and led the horses into the mesquite where wheel ruts already made a path. A lean rider came out of the brush with his hat in his hands and ash on his cheeks. One of Whitlow's hands. His eyes were wide. Fire east, he said. The basin. It started before dawn. Tala was already down from the bench. Her fingers tightened on the stone at her throat until the cord bit skin. Which part, she said. He pointed with his chin. Caves north side. I saw women run for them. Men on horses lit the roofs and rode a circle to catch stragglers. Black coats. One had a badge at his belt. Kincaid. The word landed in Caleb's mouth like a stone. He looked toward the low line of the Sierra. Smoke stood there now in a thin gray seam. Whitlow came up at a trot with 2 more riders and a spare horse. He had put his rifle in a scabbard and his face back into the shape of law. He saw the sack in Jesse's hand and nodded once. Give me half, he said. Letters and deeds. Keep a ledger and that telegram stack. The capital will not wait on us. He put a palm on Caleb's shoulder and left it there a beat. Ride smart. Caleb split the hall without talk. Paper felt heavy in his hands. He gave Whitlow the letters signed with Kincaid's neat hand and the strings of deeds. He kept the ledger with the list and the bank drafts that named Sheriff Pike. Jesse slid the telegram carbons into his shirt behind his heart. Tala tied the sack again. Whitlow took the bay and turned him towards Santa Fe. He did not look back. His men fell in on either side like doors closing. Caleb, Tala, and Jesse went to the livery for mounts. A sleepy boy started to speak and then saw the smoke line and did not. Jesse threw coins on the rail without counting and saddled fast. Caleb chose a rangy sorrel that moved like it had sense. Tala found a mare with a smart eye and a good shoulder. She checked the cinch twice and laid her cheek to the mare's neck for the space of a breath. They took the creek road first, and then left it following deer paths and sand tongues that led toward open. Night fought the rim of the sky and lost. The world took color. The air felt thin and new. Jesse rode a handspan behind and to the right, watching the back trail. He had the shotgun across his lap and a set to his jaw that said he was done being silent. Caleb kept the sack tight under his leg and the Colt where he could reach it. Tala rode light in the saddle eyes, always moving fingers grazing brush tops as if greeting allies. The first breath of the fire reached them in the flat, not the tar stink of torches. The sweet dark smell of roofs and beds and wool. The sound came after a far hiss that did not belong to water. They climbed the last rise at a canter and pulled up on the lip of Coyote Basin. The settlement sat in a curve of rock that had held families well. Smoke towered from 3 roofs. A 4th folded in on itself and went to orange pieces. Riders moved through the open spaces and put fire where fire did not live. Others stood off and watched the cave's rifles across saddles. Tala pointed toward the rocks at the north. There, she said, the narrow cut behind the prickly pear. Caleb saw faces in the crack. Women pressed back against stone children at their knees, a pair of boys holding a blanket for a door. 2 riders had found the angle and were lining shots. He put his heels to the sorrel and went for them, Jesse coming hard on his left. Caleb fired at the nearest rider's stirrup to scare the horse. The animal screamed and went sideways. The man lost his seat and fell onto his shoulder. Jesse's shotgun boomed once low. The second rider's mount folded in the knees and the man rolled clear with his rifle under him. He crawled for cover. Jesse kicked the rifle away and kept moving. Tala peeled to the right and slid from the mare at the cave mouth. She spoke fast in Mescalero. Hands reached from the dark to pull her in and then pushed children out in a string. She set people moving toward a slot in the rock that would take them up to a high shelf. She moved with the river in her voice, steady, cool, unavoidable. Caleb wheeled and crossed the open. A fresh crew of riders came up from the south end of the basin. At their head rode a man in a clean coat. The coat had dust on the hem and pride in the seams. A brass badge caught sun on his belt. Byron Kincaid sat like someone used to giving orders from the center of a map. He saw Caleb and smiled the way men smile at chessboards. He lifted his hand and 2 riders cut left to flank. He drew a nickel revolver and held it just below level. Reynolds, he called. He gave the old name as if he had polished it all morning. Come down off that horse. Caleb came down, but it was from a run. He put 2 shots into the ground at the feet of Kincaid's horse. The animal balked and threw its head. Kincaid held it with a jerk on the bit that was more practiced than kind. He fired at Caleb and missed clean. The shot hit a water barrel and threw a white fan. Caleb closed the distance in 5 strides and grabbed Kincaid by the coat. They hit the dirt together and rolled through blackened grass. Kincaid fought like a man who worked desks and fenced on Sundays. He kept his arms in and turned his weight. He went for Caleb's eyes with a thumb. Caleb let the thumb have his cheek and took the wrist. He wrenched once and felt something give. Kincaid hissed. The nickel revolver lay a yard away in ash. Kincaid reached for it with his left. Caleb reached first and kicked it under a broken bench. Jesse rode past and scattered 2 riders with 3 fast shots. The shotgun bucked and bucked again. Wood splinters flew. A horse screamed. 1 man limped for his life, 1 did not get up. At the cave, Tala had her back to the rock and a rifle at her shoulder. She fired short, sharp shots that made men keep their heads down. A girl no older than 10 ran by with a baby under her shirt. An elder with white braids beat at a roof spark with a wet blanket. Smoke covered everything in a gray taste that lay under the tongue. Kincaid's knee found Caleb's ribs and took breath. Kincaid's mouth moved close. You never could hold a line, he said. Caleb saw his own hand at Kincaid's throat and made it stop. He dug his knuckles into the joint at Kincaid's elbow and rolled him. He put his forearm across Kincaid's jaw and his weight where it needed to be. Give me a reason, Kincaid said through his teeth. Caleb pulled the Colt and set the muzzle under Kincaid's cheekbone. The world narrowed to metal and breath and the thin sound of Tarragon roof shingles catching. His finger found the curve of the trigger. He could feel the stone Tala had given him against his palm through the grip, smooth, cool, whole, wool. "Do not burn the good part," Tala said. She had come to stand at his shoulder without his hearing her. Her face was streaked with soot. Her bandages had turned dark again. Her voice was not loud. It cut. Caleb breathed and let weight run out of him until the ground took it. He pulled the Colt away and set it at his own knee. He flipped Kincaid and pinned his wrists. Jesse came and bound them with a piece of harness. Kincaid stopped fighting. He tested the cord and looked up at sky. 4 riders broke off and tried to make the south cut. Jesse sent one into a mesquite with a shot to the saddle. The other 3 thought better and bent their heads to speed. The worst of the burning had passed. The houses that could be saved were being saved with wet sacks and calm hands. The ones that could not were already a memory, and heat still hung over the foundations. 6 bodies lay under blankets by a pinyon. The edges of the blankets fluttered where wind found them. A woman keened once and then covered her mouth. Caleb stood. He held the sack of papers tight against his side and looked at the faces in the cave mouth and the faces by the blankets. He felt the watch in his pocket like a small clock that belonged to another time. He would not take it out. Not here. Jesse hauled Kincaid to his feet. The man's coat hung wrong now where the seam had popped. His eyes had gone flat and busy. They moved over the basin like a man taking inventory in a shop he did not own. He saw the sack and looked away. Hoofbeats climbed the far slope. Not many, a pair at most. Caleb looked up. A figure on the rim sat, his horse-still hat brim low, a long gun over the saddle horn. Sun hit the lens of a small spyglass and threw one hard white wink across the basin. The shot came a heartbeat, later dry and fast from the rim. Dust jumped at Caleb's boot. The echo ran around the rocks like a boy with a stick. He put a hand on Kincaid's collar and pulled him toward Stone. Jesse swung the shotgun and found the line. Tala had her rifle at her cheek and did not blink. The rim shooter fired again. Dust leaped at Caleb's boot and stung his ankle. Tala stepped into the open and took a breath as if she were about to dive. The rifle came to her shoulder. She watched the rim, not the muzzle. When Sun hit glass a second time, she sent a single clean shot. Stone chipped near the glint. A horse on the ridge tossed its head. The rider slid back out of sight and ran the crest west. Jesse lifted the shotgun, judged the distance, and saved the round. Kincaid breathed through his teeth. The cord bit his wrists. He looked from Tala to Jesse to the smoke lifting out of the houses and did not find a line to stand on. Caleb walked the basin and put names to bodies where he could. He helped lift blankets. He took a small boy into his arms and carried him to the cave. The boy wrapped both hands around a fistful of Caleb's shirt and did not cry. Tala pressed wet cloths into the hands that could still help. She spoke to elders and children with the same steady voice. Jesse took a turn on watch at the south cut and kept his eyes on the rim even when the wind threw grit into them. They gathered the living. They gathered what tools had not burned and what food had not scorched. They bound the wounds they could and tied splints where bones asked for stillness. Then they went. The column stretched thin across the flats. 2 travois dragged at the back, careful and slow. The sun climbed, pulled shadows short, and made the land shine like hammered tin. The wind smelled like wet ash and horse. At Whitlow Ranch, the foreman met them at the gate, with women from the kitchen already behind him. Mrs. Albee took command without moving fast. She sent water to the yard in 3 wash tubs. She warmed broth. She boiled needles. She eased a child's blistered hands into cool water and held the wrists until the flinch went out of them. She moved Tala to a chair by the window and unwrapped her palms. The bandages came away dark. Tala's jaw set while Mrs. Albee worked. The skin beneath looked angry and raw. Mrs. Albee laid a salve that smelled of pine and beeswax. She bound the hands with clean linen and tied the ends small and neat. Caleb and Jesse took Kincaid to the root cellar and locked the door with a bar so thick it had a life. Kincaid sat on a crate and watched them as if every nail had been hammered for this moment. He did not speak. Jesse set a chair where the lamplight would fall on the door and sat with the shotgun across his knees. Near noon, an express rider came up the lane with foam on his horse and dust on his teeth. He handed the foreman a folded paper and drank from a dipper until his hands shook. Caleb broke the seal and read, Judge Boone had taken Whitlow's papers and signed warrants for seizure and arrest. The marshal's office had left the capital with deputies and spare horses. Sheriff Pike arrived an hour later with 3 men trying to look busy at his back. He rode up hard and swung down stiff. He saw the Mescalero women in the shade and shifted his hat in his hands. He saw Caleb at the porch and put his face back on. "By county authority, I demand custody of Byron Kincaid," he said. The foreman handed him a second paper. Pike read it slow. His lips worked. He lifted his eyes to Caleb and then to Mrs. Albee, and then to the far edge of the yard where two elders sat with their feet in a basin and their backs against the house. He folded the paper back along the crease and handed it to the foreman. "You hold him," Pike said. "You will be responsible for his condition." His jaw made a sound like a hinge. He nodded once to no one and rode away without using his spurs. News leaked in with the late heat. A ranch hand from the South Line said a woman with a carpet bag had been taken off a coach at Rattlesnake Station. Florence Carr had left a smear of perfume and bank paper on the counter, and a clerk with a memory. A writer from town said Roy Carr had shouted the sheriff's name and wept when he saw the marshal's writ nailed to the door of the Mercantile. The church bell gave 3 short strokes at sundown and stopped. When the light went to copper, they carried the 6 who had died out to the cottonwoods at the creek and laid them on the long grass. Tala gathered each family close. She took a pan of clean ash from the hearth and a bucket from Willow Run. She let water meet ash until it turned to gray paste. With 2 fingers she drew a ring around each stone they set for a head. She spoke words in Mescalero that the wind lifted and set back down on the water. A child watched her mouth and whispered along on the sounds he knew. Caleb stood at the edge with his hat in his hands. Jesse stood with his eyes on the ground and his jaw working like he was chewing something that would not break. When it was done, the creek moved on the same as before. The rings of gray dried to pale marks that looked like they had always been there. The air had the kind of quiet that happens after work is finished, and someone who loves you has shut a door with care. Caleb took the silver watch from his pocket and clicked it open. The face had a crack at the corner now that caught the last of the sun. The hand sat at 11:58. He put his thumb on the crown and wound until the spring took hold. The second hand made a small start and then walked. He listened to it go for a moment. It filled the space between his ribs where something had been empty. Jesse joined him at the fence. The shotgun was gone. His hands were clean now and looked younger for it. "You going to speak?" he said. "At court," Caleb said. Jesse nodded. He looked toward the root cellar door and then toward the cottonwoods. His mouth set at a line that was not hard, only decided. Tala came to the fence with a bucket. She set it down and leaned her hip against the rail. Her bandaged hands were white at the knuckles. Sweat had drawn lines through the soot on her face. The river stone hung dark at her throat. "We should mark the water," she said. They walked to Willow Run as the first stars came on. The creek ran clear in a shallow sheet over a gravel bar and then dropped into a tongue of deeper green. The bank earth felt cool. Fireflies stitched the air above the reeds in slow yellow script. Tala chose 3 river stones and laid them in a stack where the bank slid to water. Caleb added 2 more and set his palm on the top one. The smooth took his skin the way the Colt grip had, only colder and more sure. He could feel the pulse in his wrist. He could hear the watch in his pocket. The 2 beats found each other and held. Across the yard, the women from the kitchen set bread on a long table and poured broth into bowls. Someone laughed once, and it did not sound wrong. A boy chased a moth. Mrs. Albee stood in the doorway with her arms folded and let air into the house. The sky went deep and turned to a bowl. In town far off, the church bell gave 3 measured notes. The sound reached them thin and clear. Caleb looked at Tala. She tilted her head and listened with her eyes closed, as if the bell were not a sound but a weight passing over the land. They stayed at the water a while longer. The creek moved. Silt turned the ash at their boots into something that would feed grass. The highest stars came out white and steady. The wind eased. The stone stack held its shape and made a small shoulder for the current to press against and go around. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.